This week on Act Out, how corporate media and their warlords are spinning the genocide in Yemen in order to go to war with Iran. Desperate attempts to manufacture consent. Next up, folks are connecting issues and building bridges in order to topple U.S. empire and secure a livable future for everyone. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. So you probably have heard by now that the Pentagon, with its infinite cash and depressingly finite common sense, has decided to send troops to Saudi Arabia after an attack on the world's largest oil processing plant a week and a half ago. The attack caused oil prices to skyrocket as Saudi Arabia shut down half of its processing operations. You may also have heard that it's Iran's fault. And you probably heard that because literally every goddamn corporate media outlet is saying it. But why? Why would they be saying that? Where's the proof? What would Iran actually get out of attacking a Saudi oil processing plant? Well, here's where that bullshit translation comes in handy again. To start, think back, if you will, to when we bombed Syria a while back. The U.S. had publicly announced that it wouldn't attack Syria unless Syria used chemical weapons against its own people. So Syria, reeling from the conflict of a civil and proxy war, thinks, what we really need? Some chemical weapons. Fast forward after the bombing, and there's no evidence that any chemical weapons were ever used by Syria. But, what's little evidence among war profiteers, right? And now again, it's the same tired trope over. Different players in the very same game. The U.S. desperately wants a war with Iran, but, we just can't quite finagle a reason. The Persian version of the Gulf of Tonkin incident didn't do it. WMD's, it's kind of awkward with us pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, labeling their entire armed forces terrorists, pummeling their people with economic warfare. Even Netanyahu's years of arts and crafts poster boards haven't really managed to do the trick. So enter the war in Yemen. This ongoing genocide of the Yemeni people by the US-backed Saudi regime has resulted in seldom reported counterattacks by the Houthis. They have nowhere near the firepower or technology that the US and Saudis do, but they, like any oppressed people, have done what they can in order to fight back, to stay alive and to stand resolutely for their autonomous, basic human rights in the face of absolute devastation. So one might think it not really that surprising that when they do manage to hit a target as vital as a Saudi oil processing plant, they would own up to it, if for no other reason to say, look, we did this, we can do this, we will continue to do things like this to end your atrocious assault on our people. And that's what they did. They took responsibility for the attack immediately, adding that they would widen the range of targets in the future. The problem with that is twofold. First of all, as noted by Masoud Shadaraj, founder of the Islamic Human Rights Commission, the Saudis have shown that they are not capable of defending themselves, and they're not immune from an extremely limited attack. And this extremely limited attack has actually affected their output in a way that never happened before in their whole history. What would happen if there was a real war? After years of ceaseless bombing in Yemen, the Saudis haven't won. And now they're finally getting a taste of their own medicine, and it actually fucking up the very cornerstone of their global importance, oil. To admit that the Houthis have that power is to admit failure and vulnerability. Simple solution, totally ignore the facts and place blame elsewhere. This, of course, folds in nicely with both the US and Saudi hatred of Iran. On Wednesday, the 18th, the Saudi Defense Ministry held a press conference on stating that the 18 drones and 7 cruise missiles were fired from a direction that ruled out Yemen. They were appropriately vague and didn't say it was definitely Iran, but they did say it definitely came from the north. As Iran pointed out, however, the Saudis have provided no evidence to support their claim. During the press conference, burned bits of metal were on display, while Saudi officials further implicated Iran by saying that the Iranians had been sending weapons to the Houthis, and that this is evidence of that support. So here's the thing. If Iran is sending weapons to the Houthis, why would they launch attacks on Saudi Arabia from Iran? Why bring the target over their own country? If they're not sending weapons, then we're back to that awkward place of ignoring the Houthis' admission of responsibility and also asking, why the fuck would the Iranians want to attack Saudi oil fields? Just like in Syria, with all the tension and attention on Iran, what do they possibly get from just up and attacking a Saudi oil field? But of course, these questions are never asked by corporate media. Instead, you're just supposed to accept that Iran would just be this evil, that they'd randomly attack a Saudi oil field just to bully the poor Saudis and their demure allies, the US. There's never any mention of the Houthis or the war in Yemen. For example, CNBC ran with, quote, "The Pentagon will deploy U.S. forces to the Middle East on the heels of the Iranian attack on Saudi Arabian oil facilities." The dipshittery veiled as journalism continued. The president has approved the deployment of U.S. forces which will be defensive in nature. What the fuck? You can't attack for defensive purposes. Unless, of course, you're the US, in which case that's all you've ever done. Because when people aren't attacking, the only thing that you can do if you want to keep bombing is to say that you're bombing for defensive purposes. Otherwise, you A, have to stop bombing, which B, admit that you are just doing it to perpetuate a sick, genocidal, profit-driven terrorist campaign, which is a level of honesty that the US would die before ever achieving. Put simply, the layers of lies run deep. The propaganda floods our media streams with the toxic bullshit of an empire desperate for war, desperate to manufacture consent. Our job, as children of this empire, is to filter and to rise above, to ask questions and find answers that will necessarily contradict the official narrative and uncover the true aims and goals of our terrorist state. And once there, our job is to act, to connect and build bridges, to fortify them and move, to topple empires. Speaking of connecting and building bridges, this past Sunday and Monday in New York City, folks came together across environmental and militarism issues in order to draw those connections and create networks to organize and act. On Sunday, a coalition of groups met in Herald Square in order to join struggles and broaden solidarity work. And on Monday, organizers and UN reps from countries that have been targeted by U.S. economic warfare and intervention spoke about the importance of an international network in order to build peace and end U.S. imperialism. Here are some of the powerful voices from these events. Take a look.
First, we want to say that we at Black Alliance for Peace join with you in demanding that the United States of America cut its obscene military budget and use that money for more helpful things such as affordable housing, substance abuse treatment, clean water for everybody, whether in Flint, Michigan, or Newark, New Jersey. We are unapologetically opposed to the increasing militarization of police departments, and we agree with our comrades at Jewish Voices for Peace and call for the end of police being trained in Zionist Israel. Also, let's say one more thing about the police in the United States. We say no police cooperation with ICE. No police cooperation with ICE. Children belong with their families and not in cages. We call for the permanent closure of all U.S. military bases around the world, and the United States must clean up the surrounding areas where these bases are located. We only have to look at Vieques and our beloved Puerto Rico, where that area has a high rate of cancer. This must end. We also say shut down AFRICOM, U.S. out of Africa. Shut down AFRICOM, U.S. out of Africa. We demand that all U.S. military personnel leave the continent of Africa. Let us also remember my comrades and friends, that all social justice issues are connected. They don't operate in a vacuum, they are all connected.
I thought to myself, when did I last go to a political meeting? Because meetings I'm not really very good at, by and large. I'm quite good at standing on stages and singing songs, and I find that much easier. I thought, well, when was the last time I went to a political meeting? And I figured out that it was in 1961 when I marched from Aldermaston to Trafalgar Square in London and listened to Bertrand Russell and Canon Collins speaking against nuclear arms. That is a battle that we're still fighting. Whether we'll come to a good or a bad conclusion to that story remains to be seen. Anyway, then a week ago, I stood on a small stage like this with John Pilger, the great journalist, and sang a song for Julian Assange, who is imprisoned in Belmarsh prison as we speak, waiting to complete his short sentence for a bail infringement before the appalling, apocryphal Boris Johnson can pack him off to America so that the American government can get rid of him finally once and for all, which is, I'm sure, which is what their intention is. So we all have to make as much noise as we possibly can in defense of Julian Assange, a great human being and a great journalist.
And don't forget Chelsea Manning!
I never forget Chelsea Manning. Chelsea Manning, as we know, is also incarcerated at the time being because she, quite rightly but very bravely, refused to give evidence to a closed grand jury, trying to manufacture the evidence that they need to incarcerate Julian Assange for the remainder of what will be a very short life, I have no doubt, if they get their way. So when I was coming down here, I thought I'm going to be standing in the street with peace activists from both the climate perspective and also from the anti-war perspective. And I'm very proud and honored to be standing here with all of you today. And this piece of paper, Christ, I sound like Neville Chamberlain. I have in my hand a piece of paper signed by the German Chancellor. Anyway, we won't go down that road. This is a poem that I wrote in 2004, just before the re-election of the appalling G.W. Bush to your presidency. And it's called "Why Cannot the Good Prevail?" And I'm glad I brought this with me because I sense that it may mean quite a lot to quite a lot of you here, because you are the good, and why you are not prevailing is a very open and important question which I address here. We need a lot more, we need somehow to start communicating with the younger generation, who I see wandering down on the pavement looking slightly glazed and fiddling with their iPhones and thinking, what are those people doing over there, you know? Anyway, it doesn't matter. This is what I wrote in 2004. So when there's a reference somewhere to a Texan dynasty, you will know who it was I was talking about. Why cannot the good prevail? Here, in America, there is at heart a people just and true, open sometimes to the point of ridicule, good neighbors to rebuild the barn, the doctor's note of Western legend carried forth beyond the grave. I knew your pa enough. In caucuses across the land, deliberate they'll always stand, defenders of the Rosenbergs, symbolic of that yearning to be better than before. They never will give up their brother to the grocer's cold machine. Belt welts, livid from the strong arm of the law. On campuses, in boardrooms over giving thanks and pumpkin pie, on hustings in committee rooms, whenever tyrants loomed, we always held in our esteem the ones who hold on to the dream, unflinching while the bullies pose and fiddle on the hill. Has commerce so reduced the free that blinded like a tot, contaminated by the dog shit in the grass, we blunder, slaves to humbug and this Texan dynasty? No. Beyond the grip of trade, the young strain beautiful and proud, the hoarfrost breath of new blood needs but nudges from the old forgotten guard to scale the moral high grounds in the clouds. And that's all I have to say. Thank you. And thank you all for coming here today. And the fight goes on.
We are an organization that will, on November 2nd and 3rd in Washington, D.C., be holding a march and a conference against war and for peace, but under the slogan, turn imperialist wars into wars against imperialism. Because we have come to understand some time ago that war is a natural consequence of imperialism. You can't have imperialism without war. You have war, whether it's a Kennedy war, whether it's an Obama war, whether it's a Trump war, you're going to have war as long as imperialism exists. And there are some of us who have concluded that while it is good to protest every violation of the peace, every terroristic act that is imposed on the people here and around the world, that our responsibility is greater than that. Our responsibility is to organize and overthrow imperialism, to make revolution right here. Imperialism, whatever complexion it comes in, is imperialism. And that Obama is an enemy to the people, just like Trump is an enemy to the people. And Obama in so many ways was much more insidious than Trump. Everybody recognizes what Trump is, but Obama used his black skin, the color of the oppressed, to represent the oppressor, and that was a traitorous act that he made against oppressed peoples around the world, and certainly to African people. The people will never know peace on the planet Earth as long as capitalism, which was born of slavery, which was born of genocide, continues to exist.
Scores of countries are affected by these sanctions of the U.S. These illegal, unilateral, coercive measures impact many countries. And we also know about the regime change operations in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, in Syria, Iran, a successful regime change operation in Ukraine, which is now having a little blowback for Joe Biden, Biden's son, who was put on the board of the wealthiest natural gas company in Ukraine. And then Joe Biden went, and when that company was being investigated, threatened to cut off their IMF funding if they didn't fire the prosecutor. That's what Trump wanted to investigate. And so Trump gets a little blowback for using the threat of cutting military funding to investigate Biden, but Biden gets some blowback for his family corruption, which is not just limited to Ukraine, but that will start to come out now. That was a successful coup. We also know the never-ending war in Afghanistan. So there's a lot going on. But what's been really interesting for us this week, as we've been organizing this event, is what's happening really in diplomatic channels and in embassies. This week we saw two Cuban diplomatic officials ordered to leave the country. And they were ordered to leave the country for a strange reason that was not really explained, very vague. They said it was because they were attempting to conduct influence operations in the United States. Influence operation, what does that mean? What it means is they were talking. They were exercising their free speech. And that's what they were told to leave for. And that's of course caused a lot of chilling impact on diplomats coming to the UN. What can they say, what can they do before they or their staff are asked to leave? The foreign minister of Iran, Foreign Minister Zarif, and he was sanctioned, listen to this, he was sanctioned for being an enabler of the Ayatollah's policies. The foreign minister was representing Iran. And that's why he was sanctioned. Now, what's worse for the Iranian delegation is that they are also facing another challenge. Traditionally, there's a 25-mile radius. When people come to the UN, foreign officials, they have a 25-mile radius they can travel in. But for the Iranians, they've changed that. They can go to JFK, take them to the UN, take them to the Iranian mission, and the Iranian residence. And that's it. So he could not be here tonight if he wanted to. And so, again, this is all stifling speech. This is the United States abusing its power as the host country of the UN. The question is, when will the people, the delegates of the UN, get fed up and say that's enough?
According to the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, as of this year, there are at least 19 countries, which means 10% of the countries of the world that are on the list of United States sanctions. They include Balkans, Belarus, Burundi, Central African Republic, Cuba, Democratic Republic of Congo, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Nicaragua, North Korea, Somalia, Sudan and Darfur, Syria, Ukraine, Russia, Venezuela, Yemen, and Zimbabwe.
Thomas Jefferson, in 1786, the 13 colonies and the United States were being given birth. And he already said that they wouldn't accompany the struggle of the colonies of the South to be liberated, to be independent. They wouldn't, because they thought that being in the hands of the Spaniards was the best thing that could happen for the moment, until the United States grew enough as to take these colonies one by one for the United States. We were until 1998 a new colony from the United States. Our oil went almost 80 or 90% went only to the United States, and it was cheaper for the United States than for the rest of the world. They controlled our oil industry. That's why Venezuela had a lot of oil, but was a very poor country. And you didn't see the investment, the result of having such wealth for the people. There were no schools, no hospitals, everyone was poor, no housing solutions were being built. So what happened is that Comandante Chavez, when he came into power, not only him, but him with all the Venezuelan people, he decided to take control of our natural resources and to invest those resources in the people, for the people. And that's what we did.
Sanctions is a system which is imposed by the United Nations on some countries under the permission of the Security Council. But when we say unilateral coercive measures, these are measures, illegal measures, which the United Nations every 2 years denounce them, reject them, and ask the international community this community not to recognize them, not to apply them, not to impose them on any country. Our Chinese friends, they told us, it's not a secret. We love to come to Syria and invest in rebuilding this country, but we can't. Why? Because these unilateral measures also target what's so-called the third party. The third party is the one who wants to bring his hand, brings his people to come and help the Syrian people. But if anybody intended to do so, the sanctions again, sanctions from the measures that comes from the United States, it means freezing accounts, stopping dealing with these companies. It's a boycott. It's like a boycott or siege will be imposed on any third party who just even think to come to Syria and do this. War means killing. Sanctions means torturing until killing.
If the people are organized and clear about how we need to proceed, then we're able to put pressure on these various states to do the right thing, one. But secondly, our work means that we're not going to get stuck at the level of state centrism. That is, we understand that real fundamental change comes from the people and not from any particular state. So, and we take that position understanding that, you know, we can make certain kind of changes and can, in fact, impact on national and international dialogue and structures and formation.
I think that the problem that we have in terms of the relationship of forces is that we on the left, the real left, have not succeeded in drawing a straight line between capitalism, that is the rule of the rich, and ecological collapse. We're still allowing voices who say, well, it's human beings that are doing this. It's not human beings that have brought the planet to this state. It's the organization of human beings under the social system of capitalism that has done that. And we must make that very clear.
And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Reminder, the best way to stay up to date on our work is to sign up for the newsletter at the address below. To all of those who have donated in order to keep us acting out, thank you so much. Please keep spreading the word in order to ensure our ability to keep bringing you this show. From New York City, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left for nothing, motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been backing up inch by inch, we got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and said my shove. I'm not